Is there space at all as human beings, equal citizens in this Hindu Rashtra which is coming into existence? No, it's a given.
One of the worst hate speech sort of offenders at that time was Sadhvi Ritamra, and they had mics blaring her speeches at every street corner. She gets Padma Bhushan.
It's not a problem of offensive speech, or it's not a problem of law and order. I think it's basically a problem of discrimination. Criminal justice system is being colored by this whole phenomena of speech.
This idea that there's a violence or intolerance is new. No, the upper caste status has always been built on this very premise that there is somebody to hate, to oppress, to be intolerant towards.
One of the other things that hate speech does is that it causes a democratic deficit to the targeted community. The targeted community is pushed out of social, political spaces, economic spaces.
A significant segment of this country does not have rights. I mean, if I can lynch you and I can call for your genocide, and I get a high party position next, a few months later, then clearly I don't count for anything. Salam, Namaste, Zindabad. This is the first episode that we'll be doing this year of this series of long-form discussions on the state of our republic, DAAGH, UJALA. In this episode, we will be discussing what I think has become a dominant marker of our times, along with lynching and hate violence, along with the bulldozer. Probably the third sort of dominant motive of the Modi years is hate speech, genocidal hate speech very often. And in order to discuss the content of this hate speech, its purveyors, the response of the criminal justice system, and its impact on our politics and our society, we will be sitting together and discussing. I have a fantastic panel. Hartosh Bal is one of our most respected, courageous, eloquent journalists, editor-in-chief of Karwan, which many of us go to understand in depth issues of our times. And we have Shahrukh Alam, an advocate in the Supreme Court, always on the right side of justice, very outspoken and also very thoughtful. So let's get started. As I was saying, hate speech has become a marker of our times. I wanted to ask, who is making these hate speeches? What is the content of these hate speeches? What are the forums they use? What have you observed as a reporter and as a lawyer? Let's just sort of survey the land a little bit. So, Hartosh.
Look, I think in my understanding, I tend to see hate speech, while it is a political tool, it is used to mobilize elections, it's a manifestation, a symptom rather than the cause of what is happening, and it is almost a performative display that actually we have now created a nation where we can say these things and get away with it over and over again. So as a result, because of this performative aspect, it is spreading what was actually first the purview of certain leaders, certain extreme right-wing presences is getting mainstream. So every little, if I may use the language, chot bhaiya sangi that wants to today stand up and say these things can say it, because over and over again they've seen that there is no legal consequence to saying the worst possible things. It is an expansion of this hatred into the public sphere, where the message to everybody else is, this is the country, this is the mood, this is what we can say, this is what we can get away with. And so now you see it everywhere, in small processions, on YouTube, wherever you may.
Yeah, so the impunity is something that I want to come back to. But if you think about who is making these hate speeches, political leaders, social media influencers, this is a whole new, religious leaders, including, shockingly perhaps, women, a lot of women purveyors. You have writers, you have poets, you have Hindutva pop, you have political leaders, of course, you have the Prime Minister to start with. So, pushing you again, Hartosh, I wanted us to talk a little bit about the themes that these people, and the social media, what is it that they're saying? Why they're saying it is, yes, I agree with you, it is to demonstrate that that in this new India, it is possible to say this without implications. I think more than just possible, it is heroic to say this, and so the fringe has become mainstream, and those of us who speak in defense of the Constitution have become the fringe. That is what they're trying to accomplish, at least what they're trying. So, but can you reflect a little on the themes of this?
I mean, the themes actually come back consistently to the fact of demonizing Muslims, expanding the possibilities in which they can be perceived or portrayed as threats. And there is a history to this. You can go back, and I think we should take note of the fact that Sadhvi Ridamra has been given a Padma
Bhushan, yes.
Padma Bhushan. You can go to the whole Rath Yatra episode of Indian history, where you first started seeing the hatred directed towards Muslims from leaders, from the language of markat, of victory. The second major figure who arrives in this is Narendra Modi himself. You look at Gujarat, you look at the post-Gujarat elections, you talk, Hum Panch, Unke 25, what he's talking about, the camps, Mia Musharraf, the constant. And over a period of time, it keeps getting more and more explicit. We reach people like Anurag Thakur before the Delhi violence, almost instigating it, driving it. And today, that same rhetoric has been picked up and amplified. You now see in Uttarakhand the demand of a Muslim free state, the equivalent of drawing ethnic cleansing, which is drawing. So the ideas of genocide, of ethnic cleansing, of doing away with minorities, of treating them as less than humans, consistently talking about it, whether it is burqa, parda, triple talaq, all the forms of language that can be used in this hatred, these are the defining features. Occasionally, and it will deviate into Christianity to the point that you can have the ridiculous sight of the Sangh gathering, mobilizing in UP and saying Santa Claus wapas jao. I mean, it is as ridiculous, but it is a directed of that hate. And how quickly this spreads among people. I just want to give you one instant. I remember that while the farmers' agitation is going on, in the beginning, even the average Delhi middle class had great support for our farmers. And then you had the Red Fort incident, which mainstream television transformed immediately. I remember somebody coming back that day from Sundar Nursery saying that how quickly things change. He says, there is a bunch of boys playing, and among them is one Sikh boy. And suddenly I see them running after the boy, shouting Khalistani, Khalistani, Khalistani. It takes a day, it takes a moment, and then whatever can be voiced is being voiced, and it is always directed against minorities where Muslims are the primary targets.
You mentioned Sadhvi Ritambara, and my memories go back to the time I was a district collector during the Babri Masjid movement, and we were having riots, and I was trying to fight that. One of the worst hate speech sort of offenders at that time was Sadhvi Ritambara, and they had mics blaring her speeches at every street corner. My driver happened to be a Muslim. And I remember whenever we drive past and I would hear the blaring of Sadhvi Ritambara, I would look at my driver. I always just sit in front, and my eyes would sort of lower in shame, and she gets the Padma Shri. We'll come to the question of impunity very quickly, but before that, Shahrukh, just your observation on this phenomenon. Anything that, what are you seeing?
I want to add that it's also more insidious than just being aggressive speech. I think hate speech is always it's cumulative. It builds up over time, and it needn't always be very aggressive. At times it's very moderate, but it's discursive. It's building towards a discourse. And the second thing about hate speech is that it's not a problem of offensive speech, or it's not a problem of law and order. I think it's basically a problem of discrimination. And I think what it does over time is it creates a situation where most people are oblivious to the fact that it's discriminatory, because a new normal has been created. And now if you look at the criminal justice system in this context, the way that the state reacts to hate speech, instigative, violent hate speech, where they say nothing will happen because it won't create a law and order problem. But to report hate speech is now a crime. But very importantly, how does the judiciary respond to that? The fact that Zubair's FIRs have not been quashed. They've given him protection from arrest, but that's nearly not enough. The fact that they're not able to bring themselves to quash those FIRs also shows the kind of discrimination that they are oblivious to in terms of the operation of the criminal justice system. In a similar FIR where somebody had reported hate speech and had been hauled up for such reportage, the Delhi High Court made an observation. They said, it's not as simple as all of that. What if it's a conspiracy? And we asked the court, even if it is a conspiracy towards what? He's reporting hate speech. And the judge said, but it could be motivated. And we got into a dialogue about how, even if it's motivated, even if somebody's telling him to report hate speech, how is that a problem?
How is that a crime?
How is that a crime? Or how is that even a problem, an issue? But criminal justice system is being colored by this whole phenomena of speech.
Shahrukh, I think what you were underlining is that there's a spectrum. I mean, there is a lot of hate speech now which is completely in your face and which is openly genocidal, calling for mass rape, etc. But there is other that you are saying is more
structural
and discursive, not so obvious, but building into the stereotypes, building into the stigma, building into the hate. But let's get back to something that Hartosh also said, impunity. That I think there's one very clear. There are many clear messages in the de facto Hindu Rashtra that we seem to have emerged into, and that is that hate speech against Muslims is not only legitimate, not only normal. It's legitimate, it's justified, and it's even valorized. I think you're proving how much you love your religion and your country by being hateful in your discourse. I think that is something that we are learning, and young people are getting that message. But what is the law doing? What should the law be doing? And here, let me just underline: I'm not only talking about. So there's hate speech by political leaders, what I think Srinivasan Jain used to call VIP hate speech when he used to track it. Hate speech by very influential political leaders, clearly beginning with the Prime Minister. And he's been a past master at this. When relief camps, they refused to set up relief camps in Gujarat. And when he was asked why you're not setting up relief camps, he said, I do not want to set up baby producing factories, which I still regard as perhaps one of the most cruel statements by a public leader that I can think of. So he's carrying on this tradition. We looking at religious leaders, people in saffron robes, etc. But we're also looking at the tech guy on social media. We're also looking at the Hindutva pop singer and writer and influencer. But we're also looking at people on TV channels, anchors on TV channels. So if you could take a little time to actually think about, and you're looking at it in elections, during elections, and outside it. So can you sort of take us quickly through what does the law say for these different kinds and platforms of hate speech?
Because it's a restriction on free speech, the threshold has to be high. Also because it's a crime, it's a criminal offense. So the threshold is that any speech that immediately instigates violence, spark in a powder keg, is a crime. Also if it leads to actual violence.
But how do you prove that it had the potential to instigate?
Proximity and the actual fact of the...
Suppose no violence actually happens at the end of it.
It's actually not a criminal offense according to me. If you can prove that somebody made a speech, but nothing came of it, there's no proximity to violence.
That's hugely problematic. I mean,
Therefore, I think that we should not look at it as a law and order problem. We should look at it as a problem of discrimination. I think it's a constitutional tort, not necessarily always a criminal offense. You can't always make something a crime, but it can still be a constitutional tort. It can still be a tort in civil law. This constant hate speech or this constant racist speech.
No, I hear you. I hear you. In my own personal experience, a speech I made in Jamia University the morning after the students were beaten up in the library and there was huge anguish, and I went and made this spontaneous speech. If it was about anything, it was about live together with love and never respond with violence, etc. That has been, I've been charged by the Delhi police for hate speech with that. They've given an affidavit right up to the Supreme Court describing that as hate speech. In a matter in which we had gone to say Anurag Thakur, Kapil Mishra, Praveen Verma, etc., need to be charged with hate speech. And it was the famous day when Justice Muralidhar insisted, it was our petition. And he played the videos. And he said, isn't this prima facie hate speech? Tushar Mehta was asked. He said, yeah, it is prima facie hate speech. They're not saying arrest the people. They're just saying register an FIR. They said, we will find an appropriate time. Okay. That appropriate time, 5 years, it's going to be 5 years next month to the Delhi violence. That appropriate time hasn't come. But the appropriate time has come to charge me with hate speech. So I do see the problems and dilemmas about empowering the state to criminalize hate speech.
Yes.
And yet, I cannot be a hate speech fundamentalist, a free speech fundamentalist, because you see the consequences on people's hearts and minds of this kind of hate speech, which is humiliating, which is derogatory, which is intimidating. So where do we find it?
I'm not a free speech absolutist at all. I agree with you that it's problematic. It causes structural issues, but I'm just suggesting that perhaps we need to look at different areas of law to respond to the problem of hate speech. But
it should not be criminal. It should be in
could
the
be
nature
criminal,
of
but it could
a
also be
tort.
a constitutional tort.
Yeah, so can you explain what is a constitutional tort and how is it different from a criminal action? I mean, just for our viewers.
So a constitutional tort is something that is in breach of a constitutional or fundamental right. The state is also responsible for such a breach, as is the person who's making it. And I say tort because I'm thinking in terms of civil damages, some kind of compensation, either monetary or structural, and there are jurisdictions that are experimenting with this as a
Can you give us some international examples where this has happened? Right?
South Africa.
South Africa.
South Africa, some Latin American countries are experimenting with it.
And you feel that will be more effective?
I think it's more structural a response. It's not a one-off response. It's not an FIR. It's not a criminal investigation. It's not jail time. It's more
Shahrukh,
comprehensive.
it's the same dilemma of empowering the state, which is responsible for nurturing and even instigating hate speech.
It doesn't empower the state. It questions the lack of state alacrity in responding to a
So
problem.
it's not the state which initiates this action.
No, it's civil society and it's the judiciary. It's the constitution that is telling the state that you're lacking here. You need to do something.
Hartosh, to the same questions, both of this norm of impunity, and that's where you started, but also this free speech, hate speech dilemma. How do you look at these?
Well, when I was talking of impunity, it's just not criminal or legal impunity. I mean, because I think the legal system has got into a quagmire where we actually don't know what is happening. As you said, you can be charged with hate speech. Umar Khalid can be put in jail. Anurag Thakur is not charged. We can have a story pulled down where the army has tortured Indian civilians to death. And there is no free speech restriction there. The government uses certain strange laws. And that is not a problem. But hate speech can go on as. And so, in that sense, I don't know. I think it is up to Shahrukh, lawyers, others who can better find ways of engaging with the legal process. I am today lost with what is happening. It is almost as if the hope of getting sanity out of this process is no longer exists. When I talk of impunity, it is.
If I can just interrupt this, in our work in the Karwan and Mohabbat, we are trying to follow up lynching cases across the country, some 100 cases. The possibility of justice is so remote. There can be no doubt that it's a criminal offense and justice must happen. Somebody has been beaten to death, their video, etc. So we're seeing impunity has almost become the norm with regard to hate violence. It's also become the norm with regard to hate speech. If I'm the victim, either directly or vicariously, of this hate speech and hate violence, where do I look? What does the country look like to me?
I mean, it's a question that I think is today so strongly upfront. I mean, if it is even minorities which are not directly on the target. I mean, I'm not a believer, but I'm obviously identified as a Sikh where I go, and I am of Sikh origin. That as a minority, is there space at all as human beings, equal citizens in this Hindu Rashtra which is coming into existence? No, it's a given. And when somebody of Sikh origin can feel like this, I mean, it makes us believe what a Muslim in day-to-day life thinks, what a Christian feels. And this impunity didn't begin with the legal system. It began in drawing rooms as power was coming to the Hindu right, that people who would not voice thoughts that may have existed, it doesn't matter where they existed, but the space for voicing those slowly expanded. It first expanded from drawing rooms, it went to your neighborhoods, till it has embraced the entire country on WhatsApp, RWAs, everybody is indulging in it. It is a sign of your own little power, your ability to bully people, push them back. And in this day-to-day living, what is being created is clearly a two-tier country, which only a certain section of people have power, and they feel that they have the right to do what they want.
Only set of people have both power and rights. And I think it's important to say that what it is also proving is that a significant segment of this country does not have rights. I mean, if I can lynch you and I can call for your genocide, and I get a high party position next, a few months later, then clearly I don't count for anything, as somebody who's the target of this. So I want to move now into why has hate speech grown into this kind of tsunami in these last 10 years. And I'll talk separately, firstly, about its electoral advantages, and secondly, to social media profits, because I think we need to look at both. But firstly, about hate speech during elections. I think in the 2024 elections, as it became probably clearer through the intelligence reports, I presume, that things were not going so well for the BJP. The Prime Minister descended to his Gujarat levels, but I think he went a little even deeper. I mean, even in Gujarat, he didn't say some things as bizarre as Mangal Sutra and those kinds of things. So, and then we saw two state elections. In Jharkhand, the message was that, we've seen the videos where you're being told that Muslim men will come and marry the women and will throw you out of the home and so on. Maharashtra saw a systematic campaign that actually went on for 2 years, district after district, with the kind of hate speech that happened. We've tried to do a record of it and we'll be publishing it. I mean, you just watch it, and so we interpret the Maharashtra election results. I mean, commentators have said it was Adani money, it was misuse of EVMs, it was the misuse of the bureaucratic establishment. I don't see enough analysis of it was the harvest of hate. So we're seeing this, and now the Delhi elections, as we speak, as we are recording this, the Delhi elections are still a few days away. I had feared that the Delhi elections would see an explosion of hate speech, because they started off with all this question of Bangladeshi, etc. We saw the Aam Aadmi Party, far from confronting them, trying to compete with them in this Bangladeshi Muslim discourse. But something happened. Something happened, and they seem to be pulling back from that discourse. So I think we're seeing an interesting, worrying but confusing and maybe slightly hopeful picture, where the assumption that sort of feverish hate is a surefire way of winning elections. Is that assumption what is driving hate speech, and is that assumption being borne out by experience? Hartosh, you do a lot of reporting, so it's a difficult and long question.
Sure.
Take your time.
And see, the problem in trying to see cause and effect in electoral terms, it's very difficult to untie one strand, perhaps several of these things. Even with the hate speech issue in Maharashtra, we'd have to ask the question why it did not work in the national elections and why it worked in the state elections, in the sense that...
And why not in Jharkhand?
Why not in Jharkhand? So, and these are not easy questions to answer. I have a broad thesis of this manifestation. It's not just electoral insecurity, it also comes out at certain times most radically. And it is born out of my understanding of the rise of what I call upper caste Hindutva in this sense. That the dominance of the upper caste in Indian society has been built over a millennia of hatred and intolerance directed downwards in society.
And huge violence. I mean,
Huge violence.
we're a terribly violent society in
So
that.
this idea that there's a violence or intolerance is new. No, the upper caste status has always been built on this very premise that there is somebody to hate, to oppress, to be intolerant towards.
And also towards women, I think, and also towards women.
Absolutely. And in political terms, the retention of power almost requires this. And when you see in the 80s or 90s, because one of the great achievements of the Indian Constitution, imperfect though it was, that in 50 to 60 years more had been done for social emancipation and equality than has happened in a millennia before that. So you're suddenly seeing the riders of the Kashirams, you're seeing the OBC movement, you're seeing Mander. And it is at this point, if you see the rise of Hindutva that is coming in, you see the abandonment of the Congress by the upper caste for the BJP. It is because they see that the Congress cannot any longer preserve upper caste dominance in Indian society. The oppression and hatred directed outwards rather than inwards in this construct ensures that the turmoil from below cannot happen. And you see in recent elections, wherever the BJP fears the loss of OBC support, Dalit support, there is, I think, a greater attempt to target outward so you can ensure that this turmoil is contained. And I think some of the opposition alliances are understanding that. I think Akhilesh in UP understood this. He took along a lot of EBC castes, etc., in the fight in UP, which to me was the decisive factor in the battle against the BJP. And the BJP was rattled. And I think that is where I have to read Modi's regards. In Maharashtra, they were trying to do both. They were trying to consolidate this caste configuration as they tried in Haryana. And in Jharkhand, where there is an alternate party which is seeking these same attempts, these attempts do not work too well to consolidate. They fail. In a city as diverse as Delhi, because in this election, instead of focusing on this, they have gone back to what the RSS is very good at and Delhi has never seen before. Our reporters are reporting that they are working on the consolidation of small EBC, OBC castes, a Jat mobilization, which is their strategy in these Delhi elections. This is where they are working. And they are opportunists. They can shift back and forth. That does not mean that they have set that aside. The day it is necessary or useful politically, it will be brought into play.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is that ideologically, hate against Muslims and Christians is central to the BJP RSS strategy.
And their belief system also.
So it is their belief system. It's not just a strategy, but they have found that it works sometimes. It does not work sometimes, and when it is not working, they pull back. It's strangely almost a sign of hope that hate is not a consistent guarantee for votes, which is why the Delhi elections is actually. I was fearing that this would be a terrible election. With competitive communalism, it hasn't turned out that way, and so I realized that political calculations are pretty complex.
And the absence of hate should not be read as the fact that the BJP is necessarily on the back foot or losing these elections. Quite the contrary. So what I'm saying is they have the ability to modulate that core of hatred, of their feeling towards what they think external religions is never going to disappear. But they have the ability to rein it in or let it go. In that sense, the fringe and the manifestation of social media, YouTubers, etc., however much we tend to think that they are acting on their own, yes, and a lot of them are, it is still largely an ecosystem that is in the control of the Sangh and can be reined in or let out depending on how much it suits them. So while I think we should not make the mistake of thinking that the fringe is something that has gone out of their control, it suddenly at certain times stops making the noise. If it was the fringe, it should be at a consistent level all the time.
No, they're not fringe at all. I mean, it's very much, I mean, this idea that somebody is moderate and somebody is sort of hardline and somebody is fringe is totally, I mean, there are different voices that are used. Shahrukh,
May I add to this?
yes, please.
I just wanted to say that I agree with you. It's tactical, it's utilitarian. But I think that the damage that hate speech has done to the constitutional order has been linear, it's been progressive. It's not been pulled back at all. So one of the other things that hate speech does is that it causes a democratic deficit to the targeted community. The targeted community is pushed out of social, political spaces, economic spaces. That's been very linear. And again, coming back to the response of the criminal justice system, you spoke about the Delhi riots, and I think it started thereabouts, where the first test was this a spark in the powder keg? And the judges decided that what constitutes a powder keg is not Anurag Thakur's speech. What constitutes a powder keg is your speech.
Yes.
Because a powder keg is anything that disturbs the inertia of the middle class Delhi society. So if you're out on the streets, if you're barricading, if you're protesting, that is the powder keg. And if you're asking for those people to be removed, even through firing, even through force, that is not a powder keg. Now that jurisprudence continues to this day. That has not fallen back.
I think that's a very, very powerful, I mean, you're saying that the sharp democratic decline pushed through this impunity of hate speech. Yes.
Which has now embedded itself in the idea of what even is a powder keg. So anything that disturbs state policy is a powder keg. State policy is not the powder keg. A minister saying something cannot be the powder keg. But if you get up and oppose the minister, that constitutes the powder keg. If you were following this case from Chhattisgarh about the burial of this tribal who had converted, the state was actually arguing in court that his burial would be, the act of his burial would be an act of, it will be a powder keg, it will cause law and order problems. Today there's been a split verdict. Justice Nagratna has said that this is nonsense. The other judges said that no, indeed, it is like a powder keg. So the fact that jurisprudence on what constitutes a problem has
what constitutes the problem, who needs the remedy is where we...
And that is very much hate speech driven. That is the cumulative effect of hate speech, and that comes from the democratic deficit that hate speech is causing.
Yeah, I think that's a very profound observation.
One last thing, Harsh. 26th January has just gone by, Republic Day. You both have noticed the amount of saffron flags alongside the Tiranga on the sidewalks this time. That was amazing, but that again brought into focus the social political space that hate speech has now constituted, and who's in it and who's outside. And I was thinking that if somebody dared to be selling green crescent flags together with the tricolour, they'd probably be lynched, or at least they'd be booked under the UAPA or something. But the fact that you can get away with selling saffron flags alongside the Tiranga is the new space. And it's a very exclusive space. And that is a construct of speech over the last 10, 12 years.
That's a really sobering image, I think. I want,
I'm sorry I keep interrupting you, but I also wanted to say that you can't then respond to this only through criminal law. Yes. Because which part of it will you criminalize? But it is a huge problem nonetheless.
But it also reflects our helplessness. I mean, it's society in the end which needs, it's citizens who need to respond.
It's
I think
a political
that's what,
problem.
Yeah. There's a lot more that we could discuss, but I want to also especially focus on social media platforms and profit from hate. I saw a study which which just sort of knocked me down, which said that anti-Palestinian hate, fake news, the greatest amount of it originated out of India. And that I read another report that, these Hindutva pop songs are actually giving a lot of profit, and they're being promoted. And you even have where they create their own sort of visuals along some of these songs to advance their profits. So my question is that, how do you see this phenomenon where hate is yielding profit to political parties and hate is yielding profit to social media giants? What happens to survivors of or the victims or the targets of hate? And again, can there be any accountability mechanisms? Are we in the same kind of trap when we confront this, or we just witness it? What do we do?
Well, I think one of the problems with social media, right from its inception, despite this belief in the hope it gives citizens, etc., a lot of sort of utopian statements were made at that point of time. One is, of course, like the real world, it rewards concentrations of wealth. If you have power and numbers, you will control social media discourse as well. And it is also a formation of clubs where you are endorsing extreme views. If you find somebody else, you like him, that person echoes you, you echo each other.
Yeah, just to interrupt, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn came out with a little video where he said the 3 men who were present in the front rows of Trump's election owned more wealth than half the American population.
I think Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders.
Was it Bernie Sanders?
Bernie Sanders.
Okay, it was Bernie Sanders, was it?
But
yeah, Bernie Sanders, sorry. Yeah.
so, I mean, and it is, you expect responses, this ecosystem. Let's take one example. I don't know who it was. One of these rabid right-wing tweeters who has 100,000 followers, because it's easy to accumulate numbers and powers. Then Modi likes you, you like Modi, and hundreds of things happen, you get these numbers. I think on Republic Day, and this was, the AAP did something interesting. They have the capacity to surprise. The tableau from Punjab was Baba Farid. Yes, and the people walking along, green scarves, dervishes with Sikhs sitting in front, and Baba Farid is, for the Sikhs as much as everybody else, and for the Sikhs especially, is almost on par with the Gurus. The next level of are the Bhagats, who are part of the Guru Granth Sahib. And so here is the statement, this right wing is going ballistic. What is happening to Punjab? Is this the image they want to present? This is where Punjab is going to go. Punjab has always been like this. So much so that the BJP in Chandigarh and other places were forced to endorse the tableau and say this is the spirit of Punjab, because they know that here you have overstepped the line or not. But there is this entire ecosystem which is looking, probing, checking. Sometimes they'll make a mistake, but most of the times it will keep pushing and probing. And as you said, the essential element of this is each speech, in some ways, in small ways, is the extended impact of one lynching after the other. The fear it creates, the retreat it creates in a community, the disempowerment, the inability to mobilize.
And the hate that it settles in people's hearts.
Yeah.
So, Shahrukh, I mean, again, coming back to the law, and we keep talking about how difficult it is. What should happen with social media? And, of the 3 men we just spoke about, one controls Twitter, one controls Facebook, and so on, and WhatsApp, and I think, should there be state regulation of the social media? And I mean, I recognize the dangers, but are we saying that huge money, huge profits will continue to encourage hate speech online?
I think so, but regulation how is a problem. And I also recognize that social media companies behave differently in the US. They have far more regulations than they do in the colonies, where it's completely unchecked. disinformation, hate speech, all of that, especially during elections. But I'm not sure how we can regulate that. Remember these series of crude propagandist Bollywood films that have come, one after the other. The latest being The Truth Behind the Delhi Riots.
Has that come out too?
I saw a trailer yesterday. It's going to come out before the elections. It's The Truth Behind the Delhi Files. I'm sure you feature in it. Although I haven't, in the trailer at least, I didn't see Mr. Goli Maro or Mr. The others, so I don't know if it's actually a true documentary, but it's there, and we've gone to court with several of these, asking for bans, and we haven't been successful even once. Legally, for good reasons. The courts say that this is preemptive, this is censor, all of that. But each time that I've been to court with one of these films, I've always also felt that even this causes a democratic deficit. Because normally, if liberals and Muslims and people who don't like these films had enough social, cultural, political space, political currency, then we would have been able to make fun of them, we would have been able to dismiss them in a shared space. Yeah. But to ask for a ban itself feels like we're pushed into a corner. And yet we must, because they're so damaging. So it's a very difficult call to take. And similarly with social media. It does reiterate the fact that we don't have the same currency. And in asking for a ban, we lose out on that currency even more. We lose out on more space because that's the short solution, which is not the ideal solution.
Just add on something here that we are seeing a politics which is mediated through social media. Somebody like Modi, I think, would have still, but somebody like Trump could not have existed in an era before social media. But there is some self-correction.
Modi could have still existed because of the RSS.
RSS,
yeah.
But there is a certain degree of self-correction that is happening. For example, Twitter under Musk, while it is becoming more and more Musk's mouthpiece to attack the German government, is losing its relevance as a space where news is. The Guardian has pulled off Twitter entirely. We find, and I think a lot of news platforms will tell you the same thing, that the impact of Twitter in terms of driving readership or serious engagement is going down. Twitter is on the decline as a medium itself. Yeah? Some of it is shifted to YouTube. WhatsApp remains problematic. But the movies that we are talking of, we saw a huge spate at one point of time. Now you have one or two, but they don't enjoy mass viewership except for the first, the nonsense by Agnihotri, which was driven in the market a little bit. Time after time, they've tried to repeat that and they've failed on the market. So it is not enough to create this space of hatred. You can empower it, but if that empowerment itself becomes useless in the larger public sphere, they'll have to rethink new tricks. I'm not saying it is beyond them, but some of these are already losing their relevance.
Also because they're so badly made these films.
Exactly. I mean, it is the lack of aesthetics.
They're just boring and dull.
So if I'm understanding you, Shahrukh, what you're saying to the film question is that we need to make better films and we need to make them with conviction and so on. So,
and we need to be able to respond to rubbish in a more...
The fact that Bajrangi Bhaijaan is still one of the most popular films ever, etc., is also reassuring. And so law is, again, you're saying, not the instrument through which we need to make these correctives? Is that?
I think so. Yes, that's what I'm saying.
That's a difficult one, and I think you've said it with a lot of thought. I see the dangers of not doing it, but I see the dangers also of not doing it. And from sitting in the place of a vulnerable Muslim in this country, I would hope that the state would have done more to protect me.
Absolutely.
But I also see that the state is driving the hate against me. So what would I do? So it is, it's a huge dilemma. So this brings me to the last part. I would request you both to reflect for a while on what has hate speech done in the last 10 years to our society. You've talked about the broader question of democratic decline, and I think that's very, very well taken. I want to talk about three things. One is what has it done to social relations between communities? In the middle class, we've seen the kinds of attacks on people even praying or gathering to recite the Quran together, etc., etc. What is it doing to religious practice itself? How we are becoming more and more defensive about. I mean, the Gurgaon story is extraordinary. That you had three mosques when it was a tiny kasbah. It exploded with people, and many of the migrants were Muslim. They had no other place to pray, so they would gather in parks. There were 108 places, and they made a whole campaign against it. It got reduced and reduced to 30 and 20, and now even those are shrinking away. People are offering their own spaces. The Gurdwaras offered their spaces, but even those were attacked and so on. So religious practice itself has become dangerous, and I just wrote a piece in a column that I write, which is where prayer has become a crime. And I was noticing that when I looked carefully at the research, that in the majority of the cases, they actually being if I'm performing namaz or offering namaz in a hospital or somewhere else or something, I'm being charged for creating hatred. So it's become criminalized, and you're being charged, not the people who strike you down. So that's the second part. What is it doing to social raising? What is it doing to my religious freedom to practice my faith, which the Constitution guaranteed? And finally, what is it really? Do we have reason enough to believe that it is behind or significantly behind the rise in actual hate violence? These are, I understand them difficult questions. I request you all to take some time, just so that we have a sense of what you think this sort of tsunami of hate speech over the last 10 years, what has it done to us?
My father has this anecdote from when he was in school. He laughs and says that the naughtiest boy in class, who was Muslim, they used to have a 30-minute break apparently for lunch. And he'd run and he'd start praying in the doorway. He'd start saying his namaz. And the largely Hindu class would not be able to walk past. And they'd waste their 30 minutes of lunchtime waiting for him to finish. And he'd deliberately not. But nobody would cross him. People would get annoyed, people would grumble, people would go complain to the headmaster, but nobody would cross him.
But the respect was non-negotiable.
Respect and together with the annoyance, but nobody would cross somebody while
the respect for religious faith,
yes,
I think,
yes.
was there.
And I remember even in train journeys, if somebody was saying the namaz, people would sort of move away, people would make space.
And remain respectfully silent while the person
yes,
offers
or during
the
an
prayers.
azan or something. And now for that to distort itself into some kind of anger and some kind of trigger for most people, I think that is an effect of the cumulative effect of constant hate speech. I've said this before to you. When I was growing up, there were sometimes these chance remarks about who do you support in a cricket match? Do you support Pakistan? Blah blah, indicating that you don't belong. You've never belonged here. And I again think that it's an accumulation of that same sentiment that has now resulted in Devbhoomi, Uttarakhand, wanting to be Muslim Mukt, because you don't belong. How do
you not only not belong, you are actually
an imposter, a marauder, yes.
stain on the purity of that land. Yeah.
An invader and a threat to Hindu women and to Hindu livelihoods and to Hindu land and resources. But the larger question for me is, how do we respond to this accumulation of, or to a discursive problem? And I've wanted to ask you, even without the distortions, even as somebody who's an administrator, just being practical about an incident, would you escalate something if you think that it will not constitute a law and order problem? Because a lot of times honest policemen say to me that if we register an FIR, it'll escalate. He's come, he said something. There will not be a law and order problem because the Muslims are not in a position to respond violently to the worst provocations.
Yeah,
That I'm being cynical and sarcastic about, but
no, but
let it go.
that's a long
Let it-
conversation. In all the years that I handled riots, etc., at least in violence, I was completely did exactly what I felt was right. I arrested the leaders of rioting mobs, charged them with 302, etc. And you have the space and duty, and it meant so much to the people. I go back even 20, 30 years later to those districts, and people mobbed me. They are so, it meant so much to them that the state did its duty in relation to them. So I think I think that the state has to demonstrate that it stands with its vulnerable citizens. Whether you use the law in one way or the other is a matter of detail, but the state has to be unambiguously in support of, in solidarity with its vulnerable minorities. I mean, that's really a lesson, and because I've seen it, I've tried to practice it. I know how much difference it makes when you see. I mean, I just came back from Sambal, and you have the district magistrate and the SP. They suddenly saying we've discovered a temple, and they make a big issue about it, and then the DM and SP go and pray on that temple. I mean, what kind of project do you feel? It was the constitution that you
Even in the
swore allegiance
Chhattisgarh
to.
burial case, the Supreme Court has named the SP and said that SP said that the burial will cause a law and order problem. Burial will be a powder keg.
So I think that what we expect from our civil administrators is definitely that they have to stand in open solidarity, in conscious, emphatic solidarity with the vulnerable citizens. The detail of what law you will use and not use, I think we can debate. Yeah.
Yes.
But I think that what we're seeing is as you're seeing a situation of such decline in even the sort of relative courtesy of giving people religious freedom. The the anecdote that you told was an interesting one, and it sort of symbolizes the fact that we live together, but we must respect each other's religious freedoms. I think that has declined a huge deal. It's reinforced stigma and so on. So, Hartosh, we'll give you the last word, and adding to what its social consequences are, and I repeat on social relations, on religious freedom, on instigation to violence. What should we, the people of India, be doing?
See, I tend to end, I think, in everything I've tried to say here is that I see hate speech both as a manifestation and a tool. But it by itself is not the root cause, it is the symptom, and symptoms can do damage to society as well in their own term, if you talk of body politics in the largest sense.
So it's a symptom, but it also does damage, no?
Of course, symptoms do damage all the time. I mean, this is how we understand the whole phenomenon, and they have to be treated and they have to be dealt with. So that battle is important. It's in the same way that when people talk about the writing or rewriting of history, I see that as a symptom. It is not the cause. We had 3 decades or 4 decades of very good history books. It did not stop this. We had a social culture where films which talked of tolerance of Amar Akbar Anthony were big hits. It was not as if somebody was saying they were superficial. You can't have a Bollywood film being a hit and people singing songs without somebody actually thinking in those terms. So I think...
And the kind Rahim Chacha who was the neighbor in every sort of film, yeah.
So the dynamics of groups are, I think, essentially what we are seeing is this is a play for using group identity for power in politics, and it has an impact on social relations, it has an impact on religion, it has to have everything. We are a society that still deals in groups, so nobody here is thinking of the individual's right to pray. It is that I will put down that group by our group having this ability to suppress them. That is it. The real answer in the end is the political battle which has to be fought. And that does not mean that you don't fight your battle, I don't fight my battle, or who doesn't fight. These are all important ways to do it. But the political mobilization, the rollback, if and when it happens, I'm not saying all of this will disappear. All these leave scars on the body, huge, that may be difficult to eliminate. We may have amputated parts of ourselves in what happens. But
Scars on the soul, wounds on the soul.
but the only solution of any rollback is eventually a political pushback, a political battle on the ground. It is only there that any answer really is possible. The rest of it is, yes, curative, necessary, but it will not solve things.
So thank you.
Can I say one last
please,
thing?
please,
Sorry,
please.
I want to rephrase something I said in the beginning. There's another term. There's spark in the powder keg. There's also this other thing called embers in the wind. And I think embers in the wind is a good way to respond by the state or legally to things like these, things that take a while, cumulative, but to show emphatic support that we will respond to even embers in the wind when it's not direct, when it's not proximate. Spark in the powder keg was meant to respond to speech that is more in the nature of dissent, strikes, saying something about. But again, they've changed it now. Delhi riots, everyone who's been arrested is at best accused of embers in the wind. No proximate connection to violence, but you said something somewhere. And the spark in the powder keg bit is completely left out or redefined. So perhaps to what you said about being more emphatic, more sensitive, we need an embers in the wind approach, but that can't be criminal law. That has to be something more than that.
So thank you. As I'm saying, it's been a fascinating discussion. It's sort of made us even more conscious about the reality of our times, where hate speech has become normal and valorized in the way it is. Shahrukh tells us that the law has limitations in responding to it. Hartosh tells us that it is a political pushback that ultimately will respond to it. I would say it's a societal pushback that we really, it's what's happened to us as people. We will throw up the politics that mirrors our moral sort of landscape. I think we, the people of India, are failing, and we need to recognize that it's our failure. It's not simply the failure of our political parties. It's not simply the failure of our judiciary or of our civil service. It is ultimately the failure of us as people. And I think the most difficult question is, how do we, the people of India, resolve that we will not allow this kind of hate speech to happen, to get normalized, to be profitable, and so on. But it's a long task ahead. I hope we'll sit again and converse. The small solace is that there's already evidence that hate speech is not always electorally beneficial. And there's also solace in the fact that hate speech films are not making money. So clearly there isn't a societal consensus in support of hate speech. And maybe it's those who dissent with hate speech who need to do more to push back against how our world is being transformed. So thank you very much. Namaste Zindabad.
Thank you for having
Salam.
us. Thank you.
ये दाग दाग उजाला, ये शब गजीदा सहर, वो इंतजार था जिसका, ये वो सहर तो नहीं।